Glendora, this is the beginning of episode number 3. I am going to continue from episode number 2, of course. At one time, my husband had his executive secretary, who is also his right-hand person, come to our home to go over and explain some details of the will. And her open comment was, you sure are going to get plenty of money. You will be very well taken care of. I don't remember all the details at this point, since it was like 32 years ago. However, now, as I said, my husband and I always worked as a team, so of course my husband gave me a lot of credit and always said I would be taken care of, which I never thought that much about, really, being involved with music and so forth. I believe that Bankers Trust Company and White & Case law firm, namely Wynn Rutherford, were making a detailed study of us in our home, since the head of Bankers Trust Company trust department, namely William Wilkie, made a comment. We never thought Mrs. McCormick would publicly protest and picket. My husband told them at one point that still waters run deep, and I know she's a fighter. Apparently, they did not put credence in his word. They were definitely studying me, though, to see if I would be an easy mark in their con game. After my husband died, I met someone from Irving Trust, and he informed me that all banks and trust departments do psychological studies on anyone connected with a trust that they would manage. It was quite clear in my mind that my stepson, Eddie Jr., attempted to label his father as an alcoholic so he could get control and take everything over. In my opinion, he wanted total control. In my mind, knowing that my husband had survived polio at the age of 35 years old with exercise and receiving a medal for swimming around Manhattan Island of New York, as I understand, and observing his discipline of going to the YMCA every evening after a workday to swim and exercise, proved to me he was a highly disciplined person. In those days, it was known that many businessmen would relax by having a cocktail before lunch or dinner. Since polio did affect one side of his body to some extent, not being a doctor, I really would not know, but it also could have affected his liver. As I say, he was highly disciplined and even did exercising in the morning before a workday. His mind was very quick and alert. Now, around 1983, my husband was in Florida at our home and was not feeling well. I thought, or was hoping, it was just merely a minor thing like a flu or something he ate. However, we headed to New York. Gradually, with time, he got rather worried and started retaining water, and Eddie Jr., who was running the real estate, suggested a doctor who had him admitted to New York Hospital for tests. Also, of course, Eddie Jr. was taking over McCormick and Company as far as handling salaries, etc. Of course, I was with my husband. Many events took place at this time. Number one, my husband was in the hospital in serious condition, and I recall a holiday weekend was coming up, and the doctor stated he'd have water pumped out after the weekend holiday. However, I insisted water must be pumped out now immediately, and since it even affected his breathing, I had fear he would die if they didn't take care of it before the weekend. So the doctor agreed, and it was accomplished. However, my husband could not keep food down. Eddie Jr., who was running the real estate, etc., and attempting to run everything else, would appear at the hospital every morning at 6 a.m. before I arrived. He hired a private nurse, which he sat and watched, to force feed my husband, even though he could not keep and get the food down. My husband got so upset that he got in touch with his attorney, who appeared but didn't seem to do anything. So my husband then told me to go to the main nurse's office and report what was going on and that it had to stop. I did, and I was told that since I am the wife, I had the authority to stop the private nurse, and if the son would not leave, he had to stop. If he didn't leave and stop the interfering, they would call the police to take him out of the hospital. So I followed the orders. When Eddie Jr. arrived the next morning and saw what was done, he said to his father, as my husband revealed to me, "I hope you have 8 dying deaths." And out of his anger, I was told he did not let his father visit him or see the real estate books after my husband was out of the hospital for 1 year. My husband still could not keep food down after being in the hospital for 1 month. So my husband asked for a meeting with some directors of the hospital and made an arrangement to release him from the hospital. I then brought him to see an exceptional doctor who had a brain that worked. I would like to give a little background on him. It was Dr. David Habeth by name, and he also formed a cancer research program at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital and was very successful in the sense that he invented a cure for breast cancer. He went to Helsinki, Finland, and had them formulate his discovery, which actually dissolved tumors in some of his patients. The Food and Drug Association in the United States did not want to approve his formula. However, Germany was excited about it and wanted him there. However, he told us he simply did not want to move to Germany. Eventually, he died of a sudden heart attack, and his research program was dissolved. What a shame. He was a great man. Now, a great doctor, actually. Now back to Dr. Habeth with my husband. After speaking with my husband about his problem that he had in the New York hospital, he said it must be one of 2 funguses. That's what Dr. Habeth said. And sure enough, the first prescription he gave him cleared it up immediately, and my husband could again eat and felt much better. Now, when my husband got home, he hired nurses around the clock since he wanted me to work on my music and relieve me of all the work and worry of care. As I stated, he was always very thoughtful of my well-being and music. At this point, of course, Eddie Jr. took control of running real estate and company information. My husband would relax by walking, even at early hours of the morning when he couldn't sleep. So he hired one of the nurse's husband, who could work it all into his schedule, to go with him on long walks and take him to whatever appointments he had. By name, his name was Paul. He was tall and strong-looking fella with a lot of spark and liked visiting with my husband. So on one of the walks, Paul heard how my husband's son Eddie would not visit and show his father the real estate books or allow him to visit with him. So Paul was very upset and said he would go with my husband and demand whatever my husband wanted. Again, my husband agreed, but he did not like confrontations. And when the time came to go, he backed off. My husband went through another difficult period, and this is when Eddie sent him to a rehab center in West Palm Beach near our home in Florida. I went down with one of the nurses. I was very worried since when I went to visit him, he was in a serious depression. He was not eating or sleeping and simply staring straight ahead. Who knows also what medication they were giving him. It was so upsetting and humiliating to my husband. Again, I felt worried because he appeared to not want to live. I went to the director of the rehab and said he must be released since I was fearful he could die. The director agreed. Eddie appeared again. However, my husband was quite disturbed about the whole situation that took place. I, with a nurse, got him on the plane back to New York. And I must say I was crying all the way home, which I never do usually openly, but I couldn't stop. I felt so bad I didn't know what was going to happen to him. I telephoned Dr. Habeth, and he said he would wait until 8 p.m. at Columbia Hospital until the plane arrived. He was very accommodating. We arrived, and my husband visited with Dr. Habeth for some time, and all was fine, and he regained his vibrant self. I believe Dr. David Habeth saved his life at least 4 times, of course with God's help. He just simply trusted Dr. Habeth. He liked him and he felt comfortable with him. Now, another incident, which I'm going through right now, Glendora, because these are very difficult times, of course, that many people have difficult times, but these were very difficult times that we were going through. So when my husband's secretary and the nurses, they got together, this is another incident, and had a secret meeting. Then following the meeting, they came to me and said that I should really see a psychiatrist, which they could recommend to discuss my husband and my life. So I thought, well, what do I have to lose? I'll go and see what the psychiatrist has to say. After a few meetings, I had heard enough, since the psychiatrist was strongly recommending that I leave my husband. Then the light came on, and I woke up thinking, whose idea was this? So I then decided to tell my husband what was going on. He was furious and checked with his secretary to obtain all the information on this situation. We learned that it was a scheme that his son Eddie had concocted, and my husband put a stop to it immediately. Now, Glendora, obviously my husband's health was a tremendous worry for me and for him. So I'm just revealing that, as I said before, everyone has something in their life that's never all easy. But now my husband received some more upsetting news. It was 1 month before his death. And he came home from the office looking very tired, and walking up the stairway in our home, he said, "A man never cries, but I am, since I discovered my son Eddie and the president of my company in Phoenix, Arizona, were taking money under the table." Then he added, "You know, we had at least $100 million. I should leave the whole estate to you." Now, I do not say this to boast. It's just a fact that he made me aware of. I was speechless, but only concerned about my husband, so again I was quiet. Besides, I thought, how much money could these 2 people really take? I remember then I was told by a source who worked at Eddie's office that he had visited the Cayman Islands often. And this person said, "You understand the Cayman Islands is an offshore money haven." I was also told Eddie had 3 sets of books, so I guess it all adds up, doesn't it? And he had them burned later, and he told me someone in his office did it. About 3 weeks later, my husband, in his depressed state of mind, got very ill. When the nurses said to me when he was very ill, they said his blood pressure was dropping fast. So he must be rushed to the hospital fast, right away. The ambulance came and the closest hospital was Dobbs Ferry. In the emergency, they tried to tend to his problem, and shortly after he went into a coma. Of course, Dr. Habeth was not at that hospital, so I called him to please come and see what he could do or what happened. He did come. However, my husband's eyes opened to see him, but it was too late. After that, he closed his eyes and he never opened them again. Dr. Habeth expressed that he did not want any interaction with Eddie Jr., who was sitting in the waiting room. Now, my husband was in a coma for 1 week and passed away on November 27, 1988. I was one of the executors, and of course, meetings took place right away in December. Of course, I was in a grieving state of mind. I do remember when some friends of mine were trying to advise me and question some of the things brought up. One was in answer to a letter from Wynne Rutherford of White and Case law firm, who drafted the will, stating that they had closed an account. My husband had many accounts in regard to the real estate, but they had closed this one account amounting to $1,500,000. The question I had, and I have to this day, is who closed the account? My husband didn't do it since he was in a coma, and I had joint power of attorney with Eddie Jr., and I know I did not sign anything. So who closed the account? The bank? Where did the $1.5 million go? I've written letters, and there are no answers on the subject. If there was any answer at all, they'd just talk around it. What would you expect from a convicted federal felon bankers trust company? Someone was very busy before my husband died. This all happened before my husband died. Also, by the way, when the purchase of Bankers Trust Company by Deutsche Bank took place, the New York Federal Reserve Bank's listing of liabilities included the estate of Edmund J. McCormick versus Bankers Trust Company and White and Case law firm. And also, a confidential source within the Federal Reserve Bank informed us that while they were conducting an audit of the trust department of Bankers Trust Company, they selected the McCormick estate as one of the entities to be audited. The auditor began going through the file, and typically the custom was, at the end of the review, they would present any questions to the trust department. However, in this case, William Wilkie, head of the trust department, sat at the desk with the auditor as he went through the papers, which is highly unusual. And the auditor had questions, one of which was who owned the real estate, the father or the son? Now, it is my understanding that Mr. Wilkie stated that they did not know if it was Edmund Sr. or Edmund Jr., since they had the same name. Now, how could that be? For approximately every 6 months, the bank prepared a financial statement of my husband's assets and for their records. So they had to know who owned the real properties. Now, one of my husband's sons, named Dennis, asked Wynne Rutherford, the lawyer of White and Case who drafted the will, at the funeral, what was the approximate value of my father's estate. His answer, as I understood, was about half of what my husband had told me as he was going up the stairway. So I thought, could two people really steal $50 million? When my husband died, who got into the safe deposit box at the bank? Who was running McCormick and Company, which was left to me? Where were the contents of the safe deposit? I never saw a list of the contents, However, if I did, would everything be listed? Of course, the bank should have been in charge and communicated with me as a wife, executor, and main beneficiary. I presume Eddie Jr. could have used my husband's executive secretary to open the box, since she would have had the keys in her possession, and since Eddie was taking control, she was afraid if she didn't comply, she could be fired. However, actually, the company was mine. Why didn't the bank do their job? Why didn't they meet with me and go over my rights? That's what they were hired for, to help me as the widow and wife. I believe my husband had 5 executors, 3 of which he thought would protect me. They surely were going to be paid enough. Well, Glendora, here I stand. I lost my husband, the American dream, of course, and they are not going to help me and guide me. Do I have to go to law school to learn to know what to do? If I needed a heart operation, do I go to a medical school and understand what the doctors must do in the operation? Why did we hire White & Case and Bankers Trust Company? Glendora, something is wrong in this country. Where's the law? How does one get justice in the courts? I did expose my problem to Eric Schneiderman, Attorney General of New York, who was the one voted in to oversee these problems of injustice. And later on, Andrew Cuomo came in. He never did anything. I had written them. However, they obviously knew I was right, but they had me wait for 7 months. Was the Schneiderman's office had me wait for 7 months while they inquired from judges as to what they should do and what was involved. Eventually, I presume it was fixed, since they indicated for me to go to the appeals court, which actually was what I was reporting. I mean, this took 7 months to tell me this. It's like a dog chasing its tail. You just keep going around in circles. Now, as I said, my husband had 5 executors, and there is quite a story in a way about many of them. One was Al House, who was a partner. They each owned 50%, my husband and he, and there was a buyout agreement, and there was a reserve fund, which the estate was entitled to half. Glendora, Florida records reveal that there were at least 10 nursing homes, and we were told there were 2, but there were 10 nursing homes, and they were under the SVM entity, which are my initials. And the value was at least double of what they told us. We took Al House's word. I'm talking about the bank and the law firm because they were in charge. They took Al House's word for everything based upon uncertified financial statements. They never asked for certified statements. So after he got the estates, alleged 2 nursing homes, he immediately resigned. I don't think he even mentioned the reserve fund, and they didn't ask, they didn't really inquire, Bankers Trust and White & Case. The other executor was Herman Markowitz, which was my husband's accountant. And the third, who was also nominated in the will, White & Case, for whatever reason, they were not on the letters testamentary. Bankers Trust Company was the third executor. I got this a little mixed up here. The first executor was Al House. The second one was Herman Markowitz, an accountant. The third one was Bankers Trust Company. The fourth was myself, and the fifth was Eddie Jr., the son. And we were non-independent executors, myself and Eddie Jr. I'm sure my husband had 5 executors, because he thought his accountant and the other partner who owned the nursing homes, his accountant, he and his wife were actually friends of ours, and they would honor my husband's wishes, and that way there would be 3 executors, and then Bankers Trust, and Eddie Jr. So he had worked it out that he figured, they would do what my husband, what his wishes were. And in the end, it didn't work out that way, because Herman Markowitz wore many hats, and there was actually an embezzlement at the time when he was supposedly doing the books for Eddie Jr. He was an accountant for the estate. He was doing all the real estate books for Eddie, and he was also an independent executor for which he would receive a commission, as stated in the will. So the IRS disallowed the deduction for Herman's commission based on the fact that he was being paid for all estate accounting. And actually, when Rutherford and them never gave me any explanation of all of this, my group had to work and discover all of this for me. And we had a visit with the IRS, and they told us some of the things. And Eddie Jr., of course, there were many stories about him. I mean, he had an embezzlement in his office and many problems. So, oh God, the bank and White and Case, getting into many of Eddie's requests for money, including exorbitant commission and fees for management of the real estate buildings. And they went over the option period in the will, costing the estate millions of dollars. My husband had an option period, which they didn't abide by. It had a limit of time for Eddie. I'm sorry to say, after you hear all my sad story, Glendora, why did the professionals such as White and Case, who drafted the will and knew the desires of my husband, not handle all problems with professional justice? Why did they appear to have plans that the wife would be left out, including the children? It was not only bad management, it was no management. Then they presented a bill of $850,000 in total. What for? Okay, I think I got a signal that I have to stop this episode now, time-wise, and I'll continue. I hope you all understand what I'm saying.